Good morning to everyone. It is good to see you. 3 or 4 years ago, Brother Mike Berry and John McFadden began a series called the Family Life Series, and I asked if I could join in, and they said yes. And I told them a couple of months ago that I would like to give a couple of more installments in this series, and they said, yeah, it'd be great, and they're not here today, so it's kind of a clue. I've got a couple of more things that material I had that I would like to give that goes along with this series, and I hope you enjoy the study today. When Han and I moved to Oklahoma City in 1987, I went to work for a man that was a very devout member of a local missionary Baptist church. And one of the terms of my employment, we moved here in April, one of the terms of my employment is I attend this seminar called the Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts. And he said, I will pay your hourly wage. It's a 4-day seminar. It occurred in the summer. I'll pay you to go to it. And so I called a friend of mine, Brother Mike McCorkle, and I asked him, I said, hey, I've heard you've gone to this thing. Tell me about it. And he said, yeah, it's great. He said, you'll really like it. When you're through, call me and let's talk about Thursday. And so I did later, and I told him, yeah, Thursday was a little weird. But generally, I love the conference. And maybe you've heard of it. It is generally material that is put together and sponsored by the Missionary Baptist Church. A man named Bill Gothard sort of put it together. If you know or have heard of Governor Mike Huckabee from Arkansas, he's been very involved in it through the years. It has in the recent years fallen into corruption, as is often the case in institutions of man. And I don't know the status of that organization today. That point being aside, the material that we covered during that 4-day seminar was really good material. And that material was all about this subject of basic youth conflicts. And let me take a minute to explain what that means, and we'll get to the scriptures in a moment, because what I'm going to share with you today is basically Tuesday's material, more or less. So when you talk about basic youth conflicts, this is not something unique to this organization. This is something that counselors talk about all the time. And in essence, it's this. Things happen to us in our teenage years, early 20s, that affect our psyche for all of our life. And these things are all kinds of different things. Sometimes it can be things like the kids made fun of you at school because you were too tall, you were too short, you were too fat, you were too thin, your hair was too long, your hair was too short, you had really bad acne, you had a million things, and the kids at school make fun of you. And that kind of thing marks you. Or it could be that your dad was really mean and he was never home and he didn't talk to you. It could be that. Or it could be that you, or particularly maybe your genetics, led you to be a person as a child that was very stubborn. And that stubbornness created conflict in your home. So there's all kinds of ways that manifests itself in what we'll just generally call basic conflicts in youth. Now, the right way, the right thing to happen is called maturity. We grow up and we learn to deal with those conflicts that we face when we are in our teenage and early 20s. We learn to deal with them. We mature. And instead of being a hindrance to us or causing a problem, they actually bring out the best in us. They cause us to be mature, well-functioning adults. It happens to everybody in every family. And the reason it does is because we are all broken people. We come together in our homes, and that brokenness comes together. And sometimes these scars that occur to us are because of mom and dad's brokenness. Sometimes it's because of the child's brokenness. Sometimes it's brokenness from somebody else. And quite often it's everybody pitches in and helps make that stew. But that's what is meant by basic youth conflicts. And counselors and different ones, there's books and books and books on this subject. Well, this group put together material from the Bible to deal with this subject. Now, many of you have gone through some issues with it, and I'm really not speaking to you. My target this morning is this row and that row over there, my grandkids and the young people in the crowd that are your age, more or less. That's really who I want to talk to, because that's what this material is suited towards. So, and because what happens if you don't deal with that and the child grows up to be an adult, now there's separation. The conflict becomes separation, and nobody is the better for it. The family's never right. It never gets it right. And it's not supposed to be that way. The book of Romans chapter 1 talks about, I think the King James uses the term natural affection. Other English translations translate it familial love. The term that's used there is describing the normal, natural love you have for people in your family. The Bible is filled with instructions about how our families are supposed to be, if you'll let me use the word, a clan. We are supposed to be a group, and we're supposed to be really tight and love one another. We are supposed to do that. And when these conflicts occur and we don't address them, there becomes tension in the clan, and somebody leaves, and some of you are dealing with that, and it's very hard. And my sympathy goes to you. And this material's not really, I mean, you may find some of it interesting, but it's really what I want to talk to today are the young people, so that as you're facing these conflicts, you know how to deal with them correctly, and you're the better person for it. And so that this doesn't become your reality. Because listen to what David said. David, this quote is what it looked like after the smoke cleared, and here's what was left. The king was deeply moved and went out to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." There was a conflict in that home, a basic youth conflict that they did not deal with correctly. And the result is Absalom is dead and David wishes he was dead. That's the result. So this really matters. If you're 14, 16, 20, 22 years old, whatever those conflicts are that you grew up with, you got to get a hold of those. Because the choice is what David's dealing with, or a maturity that lets you face life and be able to stand up against all the problems that life will bring to you. So we're going to unravel the story of David and Absalom and the others in David's family and see if we can't tease out some of these truths that deal with, and in this case they did not deal with, basic youth conflict and how it affected David's home. All right, David's family tree. It's a big tree. Let's talk a little bit about David. David was king over Israel. He had several wives. He was a descendant of the tribe of Judah. He was anointed to be king, and God blessed him to have a large family. And he did have a large family, a lot of children, a lot of sons, a lot of daughters, and his descendants went on to bring about the family that would bring Christ into this earth. I know you can't read that. It's not my intention for you guys to read it. I just want to put that up there to show you it's a big family. We'll get into the details for a moment. The first element of conflict in David's home was brought on by David. I want to read about it. And it doesn't mean it's always this way, but it was in this case. 2 Samuel verse 12, verse 9 through 11. Why, talking to David, why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite and the sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him and the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie down with your wife in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. God tells David, David, you introduced sin into your home. You opened the front door and you brought it right in and let it have a seat right there at the table. When you committed adultery with the wife of Bathsheba, and when you had Uriah put to death. That's what you did. And here's the result. You have introduced a conflict. A conflict that will become a basic youth conflict of your children. And it's going to be a destructive force in your home. So that your home will begin to have to deal with this thing. And you're going to have all kinds of brokenness in your home. First lesson, parents. We're all broken, and we're going to have some brokenness in our home. But one of the first things you've got to do is get a handle on sin. You can't be opening the door and just walking it right in. You can't do that. For the sake of your family, you cannot do that. If you've got sin problem, if you have adultery problems or murder problems or alcohol problems or whatever other problems you're wrestling with, you bring them home, here's what you do. Someday, somebody's going to be dead or dead to you, and you're going to wish you were dead. That's what's going to happen. You can put that in the bank. Or you could get a handle on your sin problem and try to fix it. Try to deal with it. Be open and honest about it. It means so much to do that. That's the first thing. And this is why the cascade of events that we're going to read about happened. This is exactly why the rest of it happened. It began with this. And don't get me wrong, it's not always this way. Quite often, it's not the parents. It's some other force that is the genesis of conflict. It's quite often that way. But it can be this. Many times, this is the problem. So David does this horrible sin. God says, well, you did it, buddy. Here comes all these problems you're about to have. And so you zoom in on the family. I want to take a moment to, I used to could remember all these things, and I just cannot remember stuff anymore. So all the kids were wondering what cardboard I used last time, so it's 7-Up today. These are my cheat notes. Let's talk about 2 Samuel chapter 13 through verse 18. Here's what happened. So first, let's introduce these characters. You got David up in the top in the middle. Over there to your right, a fellow named Joab. Joab was David's nephew, the son of his brother Zeruiah. Now, Joab was a ruthless, cold, calculated killer. He's one of my favorite characters in the Bible. He just is. He's John Wayne or Bruce Willis or whoever it is today that stars in movies that is a tough guy. He's got no time for messing around. He goes right to the jugular and he cuts your head off. That's who Joab is. And so David made Joab the leader of his military. That's who Joab was. He was tough. And if you enjoy a good action novel, read 2 Samuel. There's a lot of it in 2 Samuel. It all talks about Joab. That's who Joab is. Joab is very loyal to David. He is David's right-hand man, and he is David's nephew. Over on the other side, David has a nephew from his brother Shemaiah, a nephew named Jonadab. Now, Jonadab was a scoundrel. And scoundrel is not, there are probably more forceful and more accurate ways to describe him that we will not use in public. He was a scoundrel, and we'll see that in a moment. So these are two characters going to come up in our story. Meanwhile, also, David has all these wives. One of the wives was a woman named Maacah. Now, she was from a territory just outside of Israel. David married her, and she had 2 children with David. One's name was Absalom. One was a girl named Tamar. Absalom was a handsome young man, and Tamar was a beautiful young woman. These 2 children, these full brother sisters. David also had a wife named Ahinoam. Ahinoam had, for all we know, 1 child, and his name was Amnon. So these are the characters in this story. All right. Now, what happened was, when these children got to be late teens, early 20s maybe, sometime in that time, Amnon began to notice Tamar, his half-sister, Absalom's full sister. And she was beautiful. And he started having a thing for her, his half-sister. He ends up molesting her, raping her. David got mad. He didn't do anything. We'll talk about this in more detail in a moment. Absalom was really upset with Amnon. Now, Jonadab is the fellow that came to Amnon and gave him the scheme how to get close to Tamar. That's how Jonadab fits into this. Well, Absalom, it takes him a couple of years, but he finally cooks up a plot and he kills Amnon. He's so angry at Amnon. And he escapes for his life. David grieves Amnon. Absalom escapes and goes to the other country where his grandfather lives, the country where his mother's father was from. And he finds solace in the home of his grandfather, his maternal grandfather. He goes there and he stays there a couple of 2 or 3 years. And Joab, meanwhile, must have been at some level a friend of Absalom. But finally Joab comes, he doesn't come to David, he cohorts a woman to come to David and come up with a kind of a made-up story to David to convince David to let Absalom come back into the country. And it's so funny. David is talking to this widow woman, and the widow woman's telling her story. And after a little while, David says, Joab put you up to this, didn't he? It's just like, it's like he knew what Joab was doing. And she says, yeah, he did. So David says, okay, Absalom can come back to the country, but he cannot come into my presence. And so Absalom comes back from living with his grandfather. He comes back to the country, but he's not allowed to be in David's presence because David's upset that he killed Amnon. After 2 years, Absalom is like, what I come here for if I can't see my father? So he gets with Joab, and they cook up a plan, and a lot of details I'm skipping here. But finally, Joab convinces King David to allow Absalom to come before the presence of David. Absalom comes in, David kisses him on the cheek like nothing ever happened. Absalom goes out. Absalom then begins cooking up a scheme to murder David and take the throne. And he does. He doesn't murder him, but he does through convincing Israel that he's the right guy. You got to understand about Absalom. Absalom had long, beautiful hair. And apparently that was a thing in Israel in that time. And he would cut it once a year. It'd get too long and he would finally cut it. And he would weigh his hair. Now, I got to tell you, I'm kind of particular when I get a haircut. I have certain things I want them to do. And I pay, whatever, $30 or so today is what you pay for a haircut. I have never weighed my hair. I just haven't done that. Absalom weighed his hair, and he weighed what they cut off, and it would always be what we would call about 5 pounds. Now, 5 pounds is a lot of hair. Because of this, though, he was really revered around Israel. He was a handsome fella, apparently pretty athletic, and had this hair, and so he starts kind of winning the hearts of the people, a little bit at a time. And he cooks up a scheme to rebel against the house of David and overthrow David as king, and he finally does. David has to escape out of Jerusalem, and there's a lot of stories relating to that. Marty preached one time on the old boy that was throwing rocks at David when he left. It's a hilarious story in a way. What's even more funny is David tells the guy, no, I won't kill you. I promise I won't put you to death. And then when he dies, he tells Solomon, go find that guy and kill him. There's so much to this story. It's so rich with details. Anyway, David escapes for his life, and Absalom takes the throne, sleeps with all of David's concubines, everything that God said would happen. David is embarrassed before all of Israel, and David's on the run. Absalom's on the throne. Well, somebody talks Absalom into going out and finding David and killing him, because as long as he's out there, there's a problem. So finally, war ensues, and in the midst of the battle, Absalom is riding his animal along, and his hair gets caught in a tree. And he's hanging from the tree now. The animal goes on, so he's hanging from a tree with his hair caught up in the tree, just hanging there. And one of the guys sees him and goes and tells Joab, and David had told him, by the way, if you run across Absalom, don't kill him. Bring him back alive. He's going to try to fix this thing. Well, we'll see how that goes. Well, one of Joab's men happens upon him and finds him hanging from the tree. And so he goes back and tells Joab, hey, I found him out there. He's hanging from the tree. And Joab says, stop wasting my time. And he takes 3 javelins, goes over and kills him right there. 3 javelins. I guess one would have done it. And then not only does that happen, but then all of Joab's men, they all join in and start hacking away on him. So who knows what the body looked like by the time when they were through, but they killed him. And they come back and tell David. David grieves, and we read that verse where David said, I wished I had been the one that had died. That's the end result of this story. Now, I went through all those details because it's a long story. It's a very complicated story. And in case you weren't, somewhat up to speed on the details, I wanted to go through the gist of the story so you knew kind of what happened. What we're going to do, we're going to walk through the elements of this story to see what went wrong and how did we get to this point. And what we're going to find is a truth about basic youth conflicts. Basic youth conflicts always happen in sort of these three steps. Number one, there's the genesis of the conflict. Johnny made fun of me. Something causes that first problem. Usually, we're blind to it. We don't even know what it is a lot of times. Usually, it is because of somebody's sin problem. Maybe somebody even outside the family. Maybe somebody in the family. Some kind of sin problem causes this conflict. Then there is the festering of this conflict. And we're going to talk about what that means as we work through it in this text, as we look through the examples of this playing out in the story of David and Absalom. It festers, and then finally, you get the final outcome of it. And if it's not addressed and dealt with correctly, the outcome is, as you see from David, is very unpleasant. So let's walk through the story and we'll think about it. 2 Samuel 13, verse 1. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Amnon had it bad. And you might think it's weird for him to have those kinds of intimate feelings towards a half-sister. That, in that day and time, was not completely unheard of, though it was not normal either. So Amnon's feeling this way. And one of the most fundamental basic youth conflicts that teenagers and early 20-year-old people have is sexual attraction. It's one of the big ones. And it causes a lot of difficulty. Sexual attraction is part of being a teenager, and it can drive to bad outcomes if it's not managed, temptation's not taught about, and we don't learn to cope with it. Sexual attraction on the part of Amnon led Amnon to lie to his father. We'll find that out in verse 6. He pretended to be ill. He wasn't ill. He was lying to his father. It can be very deceiving. Verse 15, after Amnon had his way with Tamar, he looks at her and says he hates her more than he loved her. It wasn't satisfying to him at all. There's a lot to be learned about that. Here's the most interesting thing about this. You'll find out in the next text that Amnon looks ill around the house. Jonadab describes him as looking haggard. Abner knew right away when Tamar walked out of the room what had happened. She didn't have to tell him. And Joab seems to know exactly what happened, and so does Jonadab. Everybody in the family seemed to know what was going on with Amnon except David. And David doesn't have a clue. Parents, you got to dial in and tune in to your kids. Guilty. You got to know what they're reading, what they're saying on TikTok, chit chat, whatever it is these days. You got to know. You're not spying. You're trying to not make the mistake that David made. You're trying to understand what's going on with them. What is the conflict that I don't know about that they're stressing over? What if David had known what Amnon was going through? And he called him in and said, man, Amnon, I've been there. I know what you're going through. But let me tell you, what you're experiencing is not normal, dude. We got to get this figured out. And maybe in the end, David says, you know what? I'm going to arrange it so you can marry this half-sister. Now, that was not abnormal in that day. How many things could have gone different if David had just known what in the world was going on in his house? So turn the TV off and talk to your kids. Don't preach to them. Don't yell at them. Communicate with them. Understand where they are and what they're going through. Try to put yourself in your teenage years what they're going through. David should have done that. He did not. That's a big part of where this thing is going wrong, right? Mom and dad don't know. Even if it's not their fault. Maybe it's some kid making fun of them at school, maybe. Whatever it is, you got to dial in and you got to know. Next text. But Amnon had a friend. What are friends for? Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab. This is his first cousin. The son of Shemiah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. Now, after we are through reading everything that Jonadab does, I would say that is a very kind way to describe this scoundrel. Very crafty is probably a little nice for this fella. He was a downright scoundrel. That's what he was. Amnon, why are you friends with a scoundrel? I don't care that he's your first cousin. It does not matter. He's a scoundrel. Young people, when people say beware of your friends, sometimes it comes out of left field and you don't realize that friend is the one that's going to be getting you into a lot of trouble and not helping you with your conflicts, but making them worse. Because I want you to notice what Jonadab does. Jonadab doesn't say, you know, Amnon, you should go talk to your dad. Maybe he can help you here. No. Watch what Jonadab did. And he said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? David, why don't you know? Jonadab, first cousin, knows. Everybody in the house knows. Why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me? Amnon said to him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Jonadab said to him, here's the plan. Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. Lie. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand. Lie to your dad. There is a lot of counsel out there that is worthless. Worthless. Young people, if anybody, and I don't care who, your doctor, your school counselor, your first cousin, if anybody counsels you to lie, to be dishonest, they're not a good counselor and they are not your friend. Period. They're not your friend. And sometimes you have to, it's not natural to push people away, but sometimes that's what you've got to do. You got to push those kinds of people away. A friend would read Romans 1 and say, part of a normal and natural and healthy life is to have familial love with your family. So a good counselor here would have said, let's go talk to your dad. Your dad's a wise man. He can help you figure this out. Be careful about those that claim to be counselors. And I say that as the father of a great counselor, because there are great counselors out there. And they are very good and very effective. But there are, for every good one, there's, 2 or 3 bad ones. There are a lot of bad counselors out there. They're guided after all kinds of things that are not godly, and you've got to be very careful. You're 14 years old, you've been told, be careful. You're old enough to be discreet and wise and figure that out. Amnon was so blinded by his brokenness, his desire, that he's ready to get any kind of counsel here that favored what he wants to do. So Jonadab, Mr. Bad Information, was right there at the step. We're not through with Jonadab, by the way. So Amnon does the deal. Tamar comes in. He has his way with her. And then he looks at her and says, I hate you. Get out. Makes her leave right away. It's just tragic. And it speaks to what Amnon's real problem was. It's a million things you could talk about here. It's not the point of our message today. And Abner sees her leave and right away knows what happened. He didn't ask, nobody told him, he didn't hear anything, but when he saw her leave, he knew what happened. David, where are you at? This keeps coming up. Why don't you know what's going on in your home? When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry, period. That's all we're told. He was angry. You know, the old law gives all kinds of instructions regarding this. There's practically a couple of chapters on this kind of stuff. David hears about it. He's angry. Did he talk to Amnon? Apparently not. Did he go talk to Tamar? Apparently not. The text, I've skipped the text, but the text tells us that she was scarred for life. She never got over this. David was angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad. For Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Now there's some really important information in this. David was angry and did nothing. His inaction was action. He took the action of allowing an evil to grow roots and become a problem in his home. Maybe he didn't deal with it because he looked at it and said, well, I'm just as guilty and I got all my own problems. Maybe he's steeped in his own problems. Who knows? He didn't do anything. So David was in action. Meanwhile, Absalom has these youth conflict feelings of hatred towards his brother. And can you blame him? Of course he was mad at Amnon. How about Absalom going to his dad and saying, Dad, you need to know that I am angry enough with my brother Amnon to kill him. Maybe you should do something. How about a good family conversation here? A hard one to have, a difficult one to have. How about that? But instead, Absalom doesn't say a word. Instead, he represses instead of addresses. He represses his feelings of hate. And so together, inaction and repression creates an opportunity for step 2, which is the festering of the conflict. There's been an invasion of sin. Now we're going to let it get infected in the family. We're going to let it start growing. Okay, so what happens with Absalom? Absalom hates Amnon. He's stewing over it. David's sitting there doing nothing about it. Tamar's gone off and she's ruined and scarred for life. Nobody helping her. And what's going to happen? After 2 full years. Okay, time doesn't fix anything. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. And Absalom invited all the king's sons, and Absalom came to the king and said, and it's a lengthy text, says, Dad, will you send all your sons to come help me? We'll have a big deal, we'll shear the sheep, it'll be great. No clue that he's had plans going on, but that's what, and his dad said, no, you don't want everybody down there, it's too much, you got to feed them all, you got all these troubles. But Absalom keeps pressing him, and finally Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the 2 sons go with him. So Absalom has been cooking up this scheme fueled by hate for 2 years. Hatred that found its genesis in a basic conflict in the home that could have been fixed. But instead now he's got 2 years. 2 years. 2 years. You think he's going to be talked out of this now? Oh no, not 2 years. 2 years, what was a bad idea has become a habit and has become a way of life. That's what it's become. 2 years of festering. Festering led to lying. Absalom's lying to his father. He knows exactly what he wants to do. He doesn't care about the rest of the sons, but he wants Amnon up there so he can kill him. Festering led to the inability to see the world clearly. He's got goggles on regarding Amnon and everything he wants to do. He doesn't see David's sons. He doesn't see David being hurt. He's not even thinking about Tamar. All he's thinking about is how much he hates Amnon, and he can't wait to kill Amnon. There's a real common problem that happens when we have these basic youth conflicts, these problems, and we don't deal with them. They become to define the way we see the world. We see the world through the lens of our own failures or failings that affected us. And that's all we can see. It's impossible to reason with us. It's impossible for us to understand things clearly and fairly. All we can see is whatever that conflict has done to us. That's where Absalom is at. Festering led to singularly focused on bad intent and bad outcomes for Absalom. Well, he gets up there. Sure enough, he has his men at the right time kill Amnon. And they do. They kill Amnon. Now, word got back to David that all of his sons had been killed except for Absalom. Now, if that's a shock to you, that's not that uncommon in the ancient world, where one of the boys of a king would kill all the other boys to make sure they would be the next king. Solomon actually killed some of his brothers, so that's not uncommon. It's not. It sounds awfully brutal, but that was the way that world worked. So word gets back to David that Absalom had killed all his brothers, and David believed it. Matter of fact, let's read the text. So they're coming back now. While they're on their way, news came to David. Absalom struck down all the king's sons, and none of them are left. Here comes trusty Jonadab, the sorry, rotten counselor that's a scoundrel. But Jonadab, the son of Shemiah, David's brother, said, "Let not my king suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead." Now, how did he know? He's standing on the porch with David, watching these people return from a distance. How does Jonadab know? Word's coming in that everybody's been killed, and Jonadab is standing there right next to David and says, "Oh, no. Only Amnon is dead." I know how he knew, because he knew exactly what Absalom was going to do. He was paying attention to what was going on in the family. Why didn't David know? Why didn't David read the tea leaves regarding Absalom? The scriptures are quite silent, I think on purpose, regarding David. All we know about David is he got mad and he grieves over Amnon. That's about all we know. We don't see any action, nothing at all. Jonadab, first cousin, he seems to know what Absalom's plan was. And so he's right there next to David to earn his way into, get a little more credit. Validation is what people call it regarding bad counselors. They look for ways to validate themselves by saying to you, "See, I told you it would happen. See, I told you it would come out this way." That happens all the time. So here's Jonadab playing the part of a bad counselor. "For the command of Absalom has been determined this day because he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore not let my lord the king take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead." I call him Mr. Bad Information, Bad Influence, Bad First Cousin, is Johnny on the spot. Let me go back to the young people and counselors. A good counselor is so valuable. It is. And if you have one, if you're seeing one, first say a prayer to the Lord that you've got a good counselor, because it's very valuable. Good counsel the book of Proverbs is filled with exhortation on finding good counsel. A bad counselor is as good as a good counselor is. A bad counselor is much worse. And that's what's going on here. And it seems like bad counselors really show up in force when we're dealing with our basic youth conflicts. It happens all the time. So I want to reemphasize how much damage Jonadab did in this family. And he seems to know all. He seems to be so connected and knows what's going on. A couple other things to note. David's first response when word comes back to him that all his sons were dead is to believe it. Why? Why do you believe that? Things, parents, this is for parents, are never as bad as you think. Someday, one of your kids is going to come to you and tell you something if you're doing your job regarding good communication with your kids. They're going to tell you they smoked a joint or that they slept with their girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. They're going to tell you that. Things are never as bad as they seem. They're not. Anything that your child comes to you with, number one, is a sin or a problem that is common to man. It is. You have to take on that approach. If you overreact, all kinds of bad things can happen. Things are never as bad as you think they might be. You have to be calm. You have to act, but if you're not calm, who will be? If you're not calm, who's gonna be? You have to be calm. And a thing happens in families called groupthink. I have a story that I cannot share, but it's involving another family that I knew that had a real bad problem with groupthink. It was in a place I lived a long time ago. And it's like prairie dogs in a prairie dog town. Somebody would pop up and bark, and everybody would pop up out of their hole and bark the same bark. Everybody think the same. And you ask any one of them, like, look, I don't know, they barked. It's just kind of a groupthink thing, right? Groupthink is natural. It happens in any social circle. Be careful not to become victim, parents, of groupthink. You think independently about what your kids are going through, about what you're dealing with, about your own failings, about where you're at. Don't let the prairie dogs confuse you, because they will. David heard that all his sons were dead, he starts grieving, and so does all of his counselors, if you read the text that I've omitted there. All of his people are grieving, and they're all, everybody's dead, and it's all groupthink. And then Jonadab shows up, no, it's only Amnon is dead. Be careful. Groupthink, it can be a bad thing. Okay, now Absalom killed Amnon. What's he going to do? Well, he flees. He leaves. He thinks he's in trouble. So he flees the country, and guess who? And Jonadab said to the king, behold, the king's sons have come, as your servant said. Validate me, Mr. Bad Counselor. See, I'm right. As your servant said, so it has come about. So here's Jonadab still being a fly in the ointment on this story. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. That's his grandfather. That's his mother's father. They lived north and east of Jerusalem, across the sea, on the backside of the Sea of Galilee is where those people lived. That's where David's wife was from that he had married. And so that's where Absalom's grandfather is. So Absalom leaves the country and goes and lives with his grandfather. And David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and they're talking about Amnon, and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. So Absalom leaves, goes live with his grandfather, and David finally gets over grieving for Amnon, and now he turns his attention toward Absalom and starts longing to see Absalom. He wants to see Absalom for 3 years. Okay, well, of course, we've mentioned Mr. Bad Information is Johnny on the spot again, ready to take credit, ready to be validated for his counsel. There's always somebody, though, that's willing to support your bad behavior, to be a codependent. You can almost hear the Bible narrative telling us what Absalom's grandfather said when he showed up. You come into this house, young man, I know your father, and he's a lousy, rotten scoundrel. Why, he had Uriah put to death, and he had adulterous affair with Bathsheba, and you just come in here and we're going to treat you all right. You'll be all right here. Young people. There's a thing in this world called codependency, and it's a bad thing. It happens when somebody has this. I'm not a very good way to define it. But it's somebody has this urge to be all answers to you, even though maybe you deserve some of your own failings. It's codependency. Us grandparents, it's real easy for us to do that. Real easy. You got to really resist that. You got to let mom and dad be mom and dad. Well, Absalom goes and finds somebody that will stroke his pretty hair and tell him it's all okay and let him. What would a good grandfather do? Ask yourself the reverse question. What would a good grandfather do? Absalom, get in the chariot. Me and you are going to go visit your dad. That's what a good grandfather would do. Let's go down and talk to your dad. I'll go with you. But this is not right. Meanwhile, Absalom's up there 3 years. David, how do you feel about this? Let's ask him. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom. Well, you are king, and it's not very far, and it is inside your kingdom, this place, and it's been, 3 years. How about get on your horse and go up there? Maybe that. What is going on with David? It's really, the Bible narrative over and over again seems to radiate the idea that David is very uninvolved with what his kids are going through. And it shows up here. He doesn't seem to have a grasp of what they're experiencing. Now, he longs for Absalom. Okay, well, you're king, and this is in your kingdom, this place, and you're married to the man's daughter. Maybe you go up and knock on the door and say, hey, father-in-law, let's have a chat. Maybe that. And finally, Absalom ran away from the problem. Running away, separation from a problem does not fix a problem. Now, sometimes you do have to have separation. We learned that from the scriptures. Paul and Barnabas had to part ways for a time. Even regarding marriage, 1 Corinthians 7 tells us sometimes you got to part for a little time for fasting and prayer. You work things out. That's normal in any relationship where we have to do that. That's not what this is. This is Absalom running away from a problem. If you got a problem in the home, a problem with mom, problem with dad you're dealing with, running away does not fix it. It makes it worse. Well, I want you to think about Absalom for a moment. Absalom left town hating his brother, Amnon. When he finally comes back, he's hating his father and wants to kill him. It didn't fix anything. It made it worse. You don't fix problems by ignoring them. And Absalom fixed nothing by running away. Let's look at the next text. So now we've got the outcome of the conflict. It's been festering now for 2 or 3 years. It's been going on. His internalized hatred has transferred from one person to another. The normal part of these kinds of things is transferred from Amnon now to David. So here's Absalom. So, and as I told you, Joab convinced this lady to come in and convince David to let him come back. And so, I believe this is that text. Then the king said to Joab, "Behold, now I grant this. Go bring the young man Absalom back." And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, "Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord king, in that the king has granted the request of the servant." Why does Joab want Absalom to come back is a little bit of a curiosity in the story. I think there's something to it, but the text just is not real, doesn't give us a lot of detail to it. But Joab sure wants him to come back. Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. Absalom sure jumped in the van and rode back with him. Didn't seem to be afraid of Joab. And the king said, "Let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence." So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. So he allows Absalom to come back, but he doesn't talk to him. Well, that's a bright idea. What have we done? Nothing. It didn't fix anything by not fixing anything, did it? You don't fix anything by not fixing anything. Fixing stuff is hard, by the way. It's really hard. It's really hard. But if you don't, nothing gets fixed. Absalom's back in Jerusalem, but he's not seeing David. He's still mad at David. All of this probably could have been avoided if David says, "Amnon, come on in. I know you got to be going through something, man. You're haggard every morning." But here we are. Then the king said to Joab, "Behold now," so what happened was, Absalom is sore because he doesn't get to come into the presence of the king. He's got a plan, and that plan means he's got to be in the presence of the king. So he goes and sets Joab's field on fire. Well, that seems like the right thing to do. What? I know there are ways and things these people have in their culture that we don't fully get, but I really don't get this one. I want Joab to help convince David to let me into his presence, so I'm going to go set his field on fire. There's bad behavior coming out everybody's ears here. So Absalom sets Joab's field on fire and convinces Joab to talk to David. So, "But no, I grant this. Go bring the young man to Absalom. Let him let him dwell apart in his own house. He's not to come to my presence." That's what had happened. And then finally down here it says at the end, "Then Joab went to the king, told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king, bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom." It's too little too late. Battle's already lost. Absalom already hates David and wants to kill him. David kissing him fixed nothing. It's too little too late. On our three steps right here, the only time a basic youth conflict can be successfully addressed is either at the genesis of the conflict, maybe during the festering of the conflict. Maybe. But at some point during the festering of the conflict, the battle's lost. It's lost. And it's certainly lost in this case. For David, kissing Absalom after what's been 5 years now is too little too late. Now, Absalom's back in the king's court. He's got his long hair. He's hanging out the gate. He's the big man on campus, and people around town love Absalom. And he's standing at the gate, saying, "Man, if I was only king and I would judge all your concerns, David's not handling it right." And he's really building up a lot of feeling around the country that, man, Absalom would be better at this than David is. David, he's a mess, and really getting the political will turned towards himself. And so Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. So Absalom's got this plan cooked up. He's going to become king, which means that he's got to put David to death. David cannot remain alive if Absalom is king. So Absalom's got this plan cooked up, and he acts on that plan. Word comes to David, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. Then David said to all the servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee. So David gets word that everybody in the country has said and made Absalom king. So David says, well, we got to get out of town. And it's kind of like, Dodge. You got to get out of town before the sun goes down because they're going to come into town and kill David. David's not foolish. He knows what's going to happen. So he gathers up all of the people. It's a big, long narrative in Samuel that talks about it, how he leaves. It's quite entertaining. Parts of it are. There's an old boy that catches him on the way that's throwing rocks at him and cussing at him and all this. And one of David's people said, won't you let me kill that guy? And David says, I don't know. Everybody in the country's doing what he's doing. What are you going to kill him for? Something like that. Anyway, a lot of stuff happens there. David finally gets out of town and he leaves. Absalom hated his father. Hating Amnon was not good enough. Killing Amnon was not good enough. Running away from the problem didn't fix anything. David ignoring the problem didn't fix anything. Being separated from David didn't fix anything. And now Absalom hates his father and wants to kill him. That's where a basic youth conflict will end up if you don't deal with it. If you don't understand what you're going through and say, I got to get a handle on this. Mom and dad, if you see it in your kids, you got to help them. You will see it in your kids. Let me say that again. You will see it in your kids. And you got to find ways to help them. And young people, when you're experiencing that, you got to reach out, mom and dad, and say, Mom, Dad, I'm dealing with the thing. You got to help me deal with this. Because if you don't, here's where you end up. It can't be fixed. Some of you are going through separation because of these kinds of things, and maybe you've come to that place. It's a horrible thing to face, that maybe I've come to a place where this just can't be fixed. This story, that's where they're at. This cannot be fixed. Well, as we go on with the story, Absalom happened to meet the servants of David, so they're out in the battle. Battle's raging. David's left town. The battle's going on. Absalom was riding on his mule. I find this text kind of humorous in sort of a Die Hard kind of way. It's just me. Die Hard movie kind of way. Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thicket branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth while the mule that was under him went on. How can you not laugh at this? This guy is so vain about his long hair and weighing it every year. What's that about? And now it is his hair that caught in a thicket. And here's this guy hanging from an oak tree. Was he kicking? Was he flailing away? And the mule just kind of like goes on. Maybe it's just me and my twisted thinking, but this would make a great movie, wouldn't it? Absalom's kind of hanging there, flailing away. And one of the servants of Joab saw him and runs back to Joab and says, I saw him out there hanging from the tree. And Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. Maybe he stabbed him with one because you burned my fields. There's so much about this that is not told to us. Why does Joab want this man to come back? So he can stab him with 3 javelins? Well, what is this about? There's so many things about this story that are just not told to us. But it does give you a little window into Joab here. Joab, not 1 javelin. No. He takes 3 javelins. He goes out there, thrusts him through the heart, and javelins in his hand, thrusts him into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. So he got 3 spears in the heart, and now 10 guys hacking away at him while he's hanging from his hair in the tree. Yeah, this one's rated R, by the way, if they make a movie about this. This is horrible, isn't it? How about go talk to your dad? How about, Dad, you're not doing right with Amnon. he raped my sister. You got to know that I can't just let that go. How about doing that? Instead of hanging from an oak tree by your hair with 3 spears in your side and your arms and hands all hacked off. How about that? Young people, you got to get a grip on the things you're going through and deal with them. Because if you don't, they will deal with you someday. They will. Just ask this man hanging from the tree. Absalom is dead. Amnon is dead. Tamar is defiled and damaged for life. David's heart is broken, and Israel has just gone through a civil war and is divided. One thing. One problem. Amnon had a basic youth conflict. Well, first David brought sin into the house, but it resulted in Amnon having a basic youth conflict and not dealing with it. David not seeing it and dealing with it. And the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." David, you say you would have died? How about this? Would you deal with the conflict when it first happened? How about that? You're ready to die. How about talk to Amnon? Would you deal with the basic youth conflict when you had a chance? How about you go talk to Absalom? How about that? Would you not allow a family problem to fester and fester? How about it get on a horse and go up to the grandfather's house and go talk to Absalom? How about any of those things? Something. The narrative is pretty clear. He did nothing. Well, the story doesn't end here. I mean, this is I know it's brutally sad, and for many it's just horrible. But there is one last piece of information we got to look at. Now David is weeping. He's up on the gate. He's crying. All of Jerusalem is crying. Everybody's down in the mouth. It's awful what everybody's going through. And it was told Joab, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. Joab come into the house to the king and said, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants who have this day saved your life. You have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. Therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants." And all the people came before the king. If you're dealing, and some of you are, dealing with these kinds of problems, for the sake of others, you got to know when it's time to get up and take your seat at the table. You got to know that. This text, Joab, now remember Joab is ruthless. He does not put things in kind ways. What Joab didn't say to David was, and this is going to be really hard, but there are people depending on you. And yeah, you're not going to feel like it, but there are people in the family depending on you. And it's not going to come natural for you to go back to the way things were. But if you don't, you're insulting all the other people that are trying to make this family what it is. Well, basic youth conflicts. I tried to share with you some things today that would be helpful for the young people to recognize what's going on. It's normal. It's natural. It happens to everybody. Ignoring it doesn't help. You got to find good counsel and watch out for bad counsel. Moms and dads, you got to know what's going on with your kids. You got to have open conversations with them when they're struggling. Don't be preachy. Just talk to them. Help them through those problems. Or David and Absalom. The message is yours this morning. If we can help you, assist you by obeying the Lord in baptism, by requesting the prayers of the church, however we can help, the elders here stand ready to help you if you'll come while we stand and sing the song.